Hello everyone. For support today, we are going to work on 9.2. Okay, so yesterday we learned all the parts about quadratic functions. Today we're going to work on graphing them a little bit more. Okay. So by the end of today, you should be able to find the zeros and axis of symmetry from a quadratic function. So your new words for that one are zeros and then axis of symmetry. Okay. So I want you to focus on those two today. So the first page we have is just a 9.1 review because we did cover a lot yesterday. Okay. So first we're going to determine if the function 7x plus 2x to the second minus 1 is linear, quadratic, or neither. Okay. Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure it's in standard form. Okay. And I see that it is not, so my highest term needs to go first. So we're going to put 2x to the second. And then my next highest term would be 7x. And then lastly, we have a minus 1. Okay. And then I'm looking at my exponent in the very front, and it's a 2, and that means it is a quadratic function. Okay, we always want our highest exponent to be 2. Okay. Then we're going to determine the concavity of, oh look, it's the exact same function. Okay, so that tells me I should just automatically rewrite it now that I have it in standard form. Okay, so the concavity, so this is when we were talking about concave up versus concave down. Okay, when we looked at this, we look at our very front number and we look to see if it's positive or negative. In this case, it is a positive 2, so that means it's positive, so our arms go up. If our arms are up, it's concave up. Okay, so we're going to put concave up. Okay. The next one is, will the function 7x plus 2x to the second minus 1 have a minimum or maximum? Okay, again, it's the same function. So let's keep that same equation in standard form. Okay. We knew that it was concave up, okay? And if it's concave up, is my vertex going to be at the top or the bottom? It's going to be at the bottom, which means we will have a minimum. Okay, because it would be down here. Okay. I'm going to pause for a sec. Okay, and I'm going to go through and definitely highlight or circle whatever you need to do to show that those were the answers, because there's a lot of information that we're writing, but the answer, okay, so whether put a box around it or circle it or highlight it, whatever you need to do, okay, we need to be able to tell the difference. Then we have, using the function on the graph, give the coordinate points of the vertex. Okay, so we need to find the vertex. In this case, on our picture, it's up at the top. Okay. Well, if it's up at this top, we want the coordinate points. So I'm going to zoom in. Okay. And I need to find my coordinate points of the spot right here. Okay. Well, we always go over first, so we went this way, -3. Then we went up to 7. Okay. So we went -3, +7. Okay. Finding those vertex points and putting them in this order where it was x and then y is how we do this. Okay. On the next one, what is the domain of the function on the graph? Well, domain, hopefully you are remembering that, hey, domain's always the same. Okay. Now, the tricky part is you might not remember what it is. So remember, we use our x, and then we use that funny e. So it's like a C with a line to make it an uppercase E. And then we use all real numbers. So we use 2 lines and then our R. Okay, or an R with 2 lines through it. Range was the tricky one. Okay, so range was when we had to use our vertex. Okay, so I'm looking at my -3, 7, and I'm going to use the y, the y part of it, and it's going to be y, and then there's going to be either a greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to. We'll come back to that, and it's going to be 7. So I need to decide, is y going to be bigger than 7 or smaller than 7? Well, looking at my graph, on my y-axis, here's that 7. Okay. Is my graph going up? Is it going bigger than 7 or is it going lower than 7? Since I'm following it downwards, that means it's smaller or less than. So we're going to put less than or equal to. Okay, and that is how we do our range. Okay, so if these terms are messing you up after our lesson from yesterday, your intermediate lesson from yesterday, and then our lesson today, okay, please reach out for some help and we can talk about these a little bit more one-on-one or in a small group. Okay. Now moving on to what we are doing today, okay, we are going to talk about zeros and then an axis of symmetry. So a zero also is called a root. That's why it has those parentheses there. Most of the time we're going to call it a 0. Okay. I just want you to recognize the word root in case it pops up sometime. Okay. Now hopefully you are putting these down on your notes as we go through. Okay. The 0 is going to be the x value when the function equals, well, it's a 0, so we want it to equal 0. Okay. Now here's the tricky part. There could be one answer, there could be two answers, or there could be no answer, so 0. Okay. And then I want you to always write your answer as x equals. So let's do an example. Okay, and these are all based off of the graph. So I want to know where the function equals 0. And since it's where the x value, what we're going to do is we're going to look at our x-axis. Okay. Now that I have that highlighted, I'm going to see where did my graph cross my x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in even closer now. Okay. Right here and right here. Well, what numbers are those? It was 1 and it was 4. Okay. It crossed twice, so we're going to have two answers. So it's going to be x equals 1 and x equals 4. That's your answer. Okay. Now on the second one, we're going to do those same steps. Let's highlight our x-axis. And then we're going to zoom in and look, where did that graph touch the axis or touch that line? It's right here at, oh, it looks like that's -6. Okay. So in this case, it's going to be x equals -6. Okay. I know that's the end of the problem, but I do want to talk about one other graph. Okay. So you don't have to draw this, but if I had a graph that looked like, or a parabola, remember that's this shape, if it looked like this, okay, it doesn't touch that blue axis, or my axis that I highlighted. It's not going to touch it, so that's in the case where I don't have any zeros. Okay, so in this case you would put no zeros. Please do not put 0. Okay, if you put 0, then that's telling me that it's touching at 0. Please put no zeros. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the axis of symmetry, or the AOS. Okay, a lot of times axis of symmetry takes up a lot of space, so your teacher is going to just write AOS. Okay. The axis of symmetry is a vertical line that cuts the parabola into symmetrical halves. We're always going to use the x-coordinate of the vertex. Okay, remember our vertex is an x, comma, y. Okay, so in their graph, we're going to find our vertex. Okay, So my vertex is right here, okay? And then I'm going to draw a vertical line through that, okay? So, and I like to put mine dotted so that I know it's not, I don't mistake it with one of my graphs or one of my parabolas. Okay, so that's my axis of symmetry. Okay, if I looked at the number it's touching -2, so it would be x equals -2. Okay, in this second graph, again, find your vertex. Right here, draw that dotted line, that vertical dotted line, and figure out what number is that dotted line going to touch. Well, in this case, it's 4, so it will be x equals 4. Okay. So 2 things I want you to focus on. Okay, finding your zeros from the graph and finding your axis of symmetry from your graph. Okay. The other thing you need to know is how to find your axis of symmetry using an equation. So we use this very special formula. So what I need you to do is highlight this formula and then put a box around it and then put a star by it, okay, so that you will not lose this formula. If you look at this page, this formula is going to pop up. Okay. So let's use an example here. Okay, so when we only have an equation, like this one right here, it's already in standard form for us. So when we worked last semester, we already know how to find my A. In this case, it's 5. My B, which is 2, and my C, which is -9. Okay, so I have those 3 letters, and then I'm going to use my formula. Okay, so we're going to start with x equals, oops, my bad, x equals, okay, and then it's going to be -b. Well, if my b is positive, now it's going to be negative. So I'm going to do -2 over 2, and then I need times a. So I'm going to put parentheses for my a, and then I'm going to put that 5 in there. And now we're going to go ahead and solve it. Okay, so remember, multiplication is going to come first because we can't do that division yet. So we have -2 over 2 times 5 is 10. And then we always try to simplify if we can. This will be -1 over 5. So in this case, our axis of symmetry is going to be a fraction, and that's okay. So it's going to be x equals -1 over 5. Okay, but that would be really hard to find if it was on a graph, which is why we need to allow for having an equation. It just makes that stuff a little bit more exact. Okay. Hopefully you're really comfortable with those 2 things, the zeros and the axis of symmetry. I have one more word that we're going to remember from yesterday, and that's the vertex. Okay. We learned how to find the vertex using an equation. Oh, using a graph, sorry. Today we're going to use an equation, okay? And I have 3 steps for you, okay? First, we're going to find the axis of symmetry using that formula, okay? That very special formula, that's our first step. That's going to give us our x. The second one is that we're going to substitute that x into the equation and solve it to get our y. And then we're going to write it as an ordered pair. So it's going to have parentheses and then an x comma y. So let's try this. The very first step, oops, my bad, is you find the axis of symmetry, okay? So in here, it already tells us to find the axis of symmetry. So we're kind of getting 2 things done for one, okay? So that formula, okay, for those that flip the page and can't go back easily, is x equals the opposite of b over 2a. Okay. So I'm going to find my a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 6, and c is 4. Okay, found those. Now we're going to start substituting into this formula. So we have x equals, b is 6, and I want the opposite, so -6, over 2, and instead of a, I'm going to put parentheses, and my a value, which is 1. Okay. So now as I solve it, I have x equals negative 6 over 2. Well, if I simplified that even further, it would give me x equals negative 3. Okay, so my axis of symmetry is x equals negative 3. And the nice thing is that gives me the first part of my vertex. So I know it's going to be negative 3 comma something. Okay. So now let's go ahead and work on that y value. Okay, so we're going to use our original equation. So y equals, instead of putting x, anytime I see an x, I'm going to put a negative 3. So I see x to the second plus 6x plus 4. Let's go ahead and solve. Negative 3 to the second power. Please, please, please remember it's negative 3 times negative 3, which will give us a positive 9. And then it's 6 times negative 3, which will end up giving me a negative 18. And then plus 4. And then we can go ahead and start adding and subtracting. Okay? So 9 minus 18 will give me negative 9. And I still have that plus 4. So let's go ahead and add that. Y is going to be negative 5. Okay, so instead of putting y equals negative 5, in my vertex, I'm just going to put negative 5 as my second answer. Okay, so all of this down here, you get 2 answers. All that work is right here. Okay. So I want you to focus on finding your axis of symmetry first, and then your vertex. Let's do the second one. Okay. When I go ahead and list out my A, B, and C, my A is negative 3. Okay. But I don't have a B and I don't have a C. In that case, we're going to put zeros. And that's okay. Using that same formula for my axis of symmetry, I have x equals B is 0. The opposite of B is 0. Okay, over 2 times A. Well, I do the bottom part first, so that's 0 over negative 6. And remember, if it's 0 over any number, it's okay. Your answer is going to be 0. Okay, so I have x equals 0 as my axis of symmetry. And again, I'm going to fill in the first part of my vertex. Okay, now let's go ahead and solve for our y-coordinate of our vertex. This one's going to be super fast. So we're going to do y equals negative 3. Instead of x, we're going to put 0 to the second power. Well, 0 to the second power is 0. That gives me y equals 3 times 0. And if I multiply anything by 0, I hope you're saying, Miss Noggle, of course it's 0. So y equals 0. Let's go ahead and fill that in for my vertex. There we go. So in this case, our vertex is going to be at the origin. It's 0, 0. Okay, we have one more example to do together. So let's find our A, B, and C first. Oops. A is negative 1, B is negative 8, and C is negative 9. Okay, so using that formula, we have x equals the opposite of B. So instead of negative 8, it's going to be a positive 8 over 2 times A, which is negative 1. Multiply that bottom first. X is 8 over negative 2. And then go ahead and divide. 8 divided by negative 2 will give me x equals negative 4. So let's go ahead and write our axis of symmetry in the first part of my vertex. Okay, and now we get to go ahead and substitute that negative 4 in. Ooh, make sure we're careful. So we have y equals negative 4 to the second minus 8 times negative 4 minus 9. Okay, make sure you're super careful with this. Okay, let's do negative 4 to the second power first. That'll give me a positive 16, but we still have that negative out front, so it'll be negative positive 16. That was tricky. Then I have negative 8 and negative 4. A negative times a negative will give me a positive, and that 8 times 4 is a 32. Then I have minus 9, so I'm just going to keep that for now. Next up is doing negative 16 plus 32, which very nicely gives us a positive 16. And then we still have that minus 9, so for my very last step, I'm going to do 16 minus 9, which gives me 7. Okay, so let's go ahead and write that in our vertex right here. Okay, that was all of our practice problems. You have 3 student practice, so these are your homework problems. Remember, you're either going to get a 1, 2, 3, or 4 for your score. Okay, if you've done the notes so far, okay, you're not going to get a 1. You already got a 2. Okay, so go ahead and finish up these problems. Show me your understanding. When you are done with those, please assess your learning. So now, do you understand? Okay, and it's okay to say no. Okay, do you understand how to find your 0? Okay, so go back up to that graph. Can you find the 0? And then look at the axis of symmetry. Okay, we just did. Okay, if you finished your student practice problems, that's 6 problems of axis of symmetry. So see if you can do that as well. And go ahead and rate your understanding. Where are you at from a 1 to a 4?